Order. Question to the Secretary of State for Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy. I start with Jason McCartney. Jake.
Question 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, sir. With your permission, I'd like to take question 1 and 5, sir. The pandemic has shown us just how important and world-leading the UK's life sciences sector is, and our government is committed to making it go from strength to strength.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a fellow rugby league fan, Mr. Speaker, you will know the brilliance of Rob Burrow on the pitch and now his inspiration off the pitch. Rob is in Parliament today with his friend Doddy Weir, raising awareness of motor neurone disease and a campaign calling on the government to invest £50 million in an MND research over the next 5 years for a virtual MND Translation Research Institute. Will the Minister please commit to meeting the MND Association to discuss this funding proposal further?
Thank you. I'd like to thank my honourable friend for the work he's doing in this area. He will know that last fiscal year, UKRI spent £15.9 million on MND research. And in the previous Parliament, 2017 to 2019, we announced £20 million to support the work of medical research charities which are now have been impacted by COVID.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been said already, but rugby league fanatics like you and I have long been inspired by the brilliance of Rob Burrows on the field. But I think, Mr. Speaker, we have been blown away by his tireless determination off the pitch, campaigning to raise awareness for motor neuron disease. So does the Minister agree with Rob and Scotland's rugby union star Doddy Weir, who are both watching, as the Honourable Gentleman has already said? We need to act now, Minister, now, to increase research funding into this devastating, debilitating and life-limiting disease.
I'd like to pay tribute to the honourable member. I think he raises an extremely important point. I don't know Rob, but I'm very pleased that he's been raised, his work, his tireless work has been raised today. I'd like to point out that the last fiscal year, as I've said, UKRI spent £15.9 million on MND research, and we've had a wider offer for medical research charities, and we've announced £204 million for Research England in the fiscal year 2020 to 2021. But I'm very happy to meet with him and see what more we can do to pursue this important topic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Lucy Lintott from Murray was Scotland's youngest MND person diagnosed with MND when she was diagnosed at 19. 8 years on, she's now living with fiancé Tommy Smith. They have an 18-month-old LJ, and on Hogmanay they are expecting their second child, a little girl. It's believed that Lucy is the first person in the world to have had 2 pregnancies after diagnosis. Will the Secretary of State meet with Lucy and other campaigners to see what we can do to support her family and so many others in Scotland and across the UK?
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for raising in this House such an inspiring story, and of course I'd be delighted to meet with Lucy and him to discuss how we can pursue further progress in this area.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. As I'm sure the Minister will appreciate, there are very many of us in this House for whom this is a hugely important issue. He's already mentioned the research, but the key to the 50 million over 5 years is that it's not spread over other research. It's completely targeted on motor neurons disease. So will he take that to the government and bear that in mind, please?
Absolutely right. I mean, UKRI are responsible for the budget, and I am in frequent conversations with UKRI, and we've got to work to see what we can do to focus with laser-like attention on this debilitating illness.
Can I just say thank you to the Secretary of State. Rob Burrows is an inspirational person whose family and everybody in rugby league is absolutely aware. He really is that great man and great character. Let's go to Ben Bradley.
Number 2, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's very good to be back as the newly appointed Minister for Science, Research and Innovation. And can I thank the Honourable Member for Mansfield for his tireless work on levelling up and the importance of innovation in supporting left-behind communities. Science and innovation are not the same thing. We're committed to being both a science superpower and an innovation nation. And that's why I'm looking hard at what we can do through the Business Innovation Forum, ARIA, Innovate UK and UKRI to drive levelling up.
Ben Bradley.
Thank my honourable friend for that answer and welcome him back to his new position. Congratulations. Mr Speaker, there's an oven-ready package available in the East Midlands with key projects set to boost private investment in the region. Government's backing for these projects this autumn is vital. Can my honourable friend confirm that government is supportive of our plans for an East Midlands free port, of our development cooperation, of the importance of Toton within the integrated rail plan this autumn, and does he agree with me that this is a huge opportunity to attract private investment into a region that traditionally is at the bottom of those tables of attracting that kind of money?
Minister.
In a word, yes. He's made a very powerful case, and free ports and regeneration corporations are vital to our innovation strategy. We're determined that, yes, there'll be funding for the Golden Triangle, but we want to harness science and innovation to drive growth around the country.
Ian Lavery.
Through, sir.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We've been clear that threats to fire and rehire as a tactic to pressure workers during negotiations is totally unacceptable, and that's why we've asked ACAS to produce guidance to help employers reach negotiated outcomes with their workforce, and we continue to keep the issue under review.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Whilst members across this House were munching away at the country's favourite breakfast cereal, Weetabix, this morning, they'll be blissfully unaware that Post Holdings, who own Weetabix, have turned their guns on the workforce in terms of fire and rehire. Employees at Weetabix are set to lose £5,000 per annum, and of course, if they refuse that, they'll lose their jobs. You know, it's quite simply not good enough. Minister after minister has been to that dispatch box, including the Prime Minister, saying how abhorrent fire and rehire is. Minister, please tell this House what you intend to do with fire and rehire, and can you confirm that the government will be supporting my honourable friend's private member's bill on fire and rehire on the 21st of October?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question, and we do in government take the issue of fire and rehire very, very seriously. There have been a number of examples. Obviously, there are occasions when businesses need the flexibility to change workers' terms and conditions in order to avoid mass redundancies and insolvencies, but there are examples where they've been used as bully boy tactics. I know that the Labour Party understands this because as recently as July, they made a load of their own employees redundant and hired workers on temporary contracts with worse terms and conditions in order to keep the party afloat. Unless this was a case of one rule for the Labour Party and another for UK's businesses.
Laura Farris.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think every member of this House shares concerns about the practice of fire and rehire, but does he agree with me that taking a sledgehammer to the delicate ecosystem of redundancy laws that are contained in the Employment Rights Act and the Trade Union and Labour Relations Act is fraught with danger, and that there are instead levers that we can deploy that would strongly disincentivise this conduct? And would he meet with me again to discuss this?
Minister. I always thank my honourable friend for intervening on this case because of her experience as an employment barrister. She's seen it from both sides of the angle here. The government is not currently planning to legislate, but because of the obvious importance, we are keeping the matter under review, and I recognise the wealth of expertise on employment law and related matters in this House. I've met with MPs on both sides of the issue, and of course I'm glad to continue these conversations with my honourable friend.
Gainsborough.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We hear lots of talk, don't we, of levelling up from the ministers at the dispatch box. Well, here's an opportunity, a genuine opportunity. Improve the terms and conditions of employees up and down the land, including Weetabix. Opportunity to legislate through the private members' bill. Stop the reviews, get on with it, legislate.
Minister.
I thank the honourable member for that question. Look, we introduced the national living wage. We've enabled workers to carry over more annual leave due to the pandemic. We've increased the reference period employers use to calculate holiday pay to improve seasonal workers' wages. We are continuing to improve workers' rights over this Parliament. We are indeed the Workers' Party. And so And so in doing so, we will continue to make sure that we tackle fire and rehire when used as bully boy tactics.
Andrew Jones.
Question 4, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my honourable friend who's been a distinguished Minister in the Treasury and Transport and a champion of innovation. The Government, the Prime Minister has made this clear, is completely committed to unlocking this country's global reach as a science superpower and an innovation nation. That's why this year we're committed to spend £14.9 billion this year on R&D and to increase the total R&D budget to £22 billion and to 2.5% of GDP.
Andrew Jones.
Can I thank my honourable friend for that answer and just say it's very good to see him back in the dispatch box. Congratulations. One of the largest employers in my constituency is LabCorp, a business which is at the heart of new medicine development, both in the UK and across Europe, and they played a role in the life science industry response to COVID. They're looking at UK expansion over the next 5 years at a number of sites across the UK. So, will my honourable friend meet with me to discuss this opportunity and also some of the obstacles that may get in the way of it with a view to securing expansion in the UK as a whole, but Harrogate in particular?
Minister.
I would be delighted to meet with my honourable friend. LabCorp is a major global corporation. Their investment in Leeds into the new clinical pharmacology site is vital, and it's companies like LabCorp we need to be investing to drive that private investment in R&D. I'd be delighted to meet with him quickly to discuss it.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Time and time again, I have raised with the Government the opportunity to invest in Bio Yorkshire, which will create 4,000 jobs for my constituents, upskill 25,000 people, and deliver £5 billion in GVA to the Government. Will the Minister meet with me? COP26 is just 6 weeks away, and not to bring forward projects like this is holding back the improvements we can make to our environment.
Minister.
As I said, I'm completely committed to making sure that science and innovation drives levelling up and regeneration. I'd be delighted to meet with her. I'm on my way to County Durham on Thursday, perhaps next week or the week after.
Alan Kearns.
Number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government remains firmly committed to securing gigafactories in the UK and has demonstrated that commitment through the Automotive Transformation Fund. As many honourable and right honourable members will know, the first site in Sunderland was announced in July and will see an unprecedented 100,000 battery electric cars produced annually by Nissan and Envision from 2024.
Alan Kearns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the Minister on his appointment and pay tribute to the Secretary of State and his team for facilitating the investment of gigafactories into the UK. Now, British Vote is making excellent progress in Blythe, but it was originally intended to come to my constituency in the Vale of Glamorgan. But these large-scale projects have both devolved and reserved functions. So will the Minister consider, when these similar projects come forward again, that a Minister will be designated to lead the project, to look after both the devolved and reserved functions and work with the Welsh Government in securing those investments?
Minister.
I'm hugely grateful for my right honourable friend's question, and I know he is a huge champion for Wales and he has huge experience in doing this, and I would be happy to meet with him in terms of the suggestion he has made. As I know my right honourable friend will know, the Automotive Transformation Fund is a UK-wide programme, and we will welcome applications for support located across the whole of the UK, and I look forward to speaking with him about that.
Shadow Minister Chilwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to welcome the honourable gentleman to his position. Now, the Prime Minister's climate change spokeswoman recently announced that she would not be buying an electric car because of the lack of charging infrastructure and battery capacity. In 2018, the UK produced a quarter of Europe's electric vehicles. This is set to fall to just 4% by 2030. Motor manufacturers predict tens of thousands of good jobs lost. So will the Minister confirm that even if he meets his own targets, by 2025 the UK will have just 7% of the battery production capacity of Germany? Germans receive grants of up to €9,000 to buy an electric vehicle, 3 times what he is offering. So what will he do to deliver the battery capacity needed to secure British jobs and make electric cars affordable? Does he understand what affordable means?
Thank you to the honourable member for that contribution. We absolutely understand what affordable means, and we are absolutely committed to building an industry which supports batteries in the United Kingdom, which ensures the transition to electric vehicles will come in a quick period. And if should she wish to, I'm happy to talk to her more about that.
David Linden.
Devon.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government is committed to introducing statutory leave and pay for parents of babies requiring neonatal care. We'll do this as soon as parliamentary time allows.
David Linden.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for that answer, but I'm afraid that is not good enough. Every year, 100,000 babies are born premature or sick, and parents like myself then have to take the time off work to be with their child in hospital, perhaps as they're fighting for their life. So when will the Government get a grip on this issue? This is something that they have committed to doing, and parents of premature and sick babies all across these islands are desperate for action. Do we have to wait for an employment bill? Why is the Government taking so long?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman, and I appreciate the work that he and his APPG does in this area. The Government is committed to ensuring that all workers can participate and progress in the labour market, and that we build back better as we recover from COVID-19. We will bring forward the employment bill when the time is right. In the meantime, we will continue to take necessary action to support businesses and protect jobs.
Shadow Minister Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Millions of workers are denied maternity pay and parental leave, as well as other basic rights and protections, because the Government only allows some workers to have full rights and only after 2 years in the job. Isn't it the case that working people are paying the price for the Government's broken promise to bring in an employment bill? And will the Minister agree with me that all workers should have full rights from day one on the job?
Minister.
I thank the honourable member. But we, are, as I say, are expanding workers' rights. We are delivering on what we can, based on qualitative and quantitative evidence, and that's based. That will be seen when the employment bill comes through, when parliamentary time allows. What we can't do, though, is work on a whim. We saw last week that the Labour Party announced that they wanted a £10 minimum wage, and this week they're reportedly recruiting stewards at their conference on £9.75 an hour. What we need to do, we say what we mean, and we will deliver.
Robert Larkin.
Number 8, sir.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, ahead of COP26, we will publish a net zero strategy. This will set out our vision for transitioning to a net zero economy and outline our path to meet net zero by 2050. Ahead of this, we've already published important sector strategies and made major green investments in key technologies, including a £240 million net zero hydrogen fund and a £1 billion fund for carbon capture.
With a ping pong. Robert Larkin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm delighted to welcome my right honourable friend to his new role, though he'll be much missed from his previous role at International Trade, where he played a crucial role in building the department from scratch since 2016. Mr. Speaker, reducing emissions in the heat sector is vital to decarbonising our economy, and the Government has set an ambitious target of installing 600,000 heat pumps a year by 2028. So can the Minister advise the House if the anticipated Government heat and building strategy will include a pathway for reaching that target, including measures to make heat pumps more affordable for working households?
Pick it up. Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that welcome. And he knows, he's already pointed out, the Prime Minister's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution sets an ambition to grow the market to 600,000 heat pump installations per annum by 2028. The heat and building strategy, due soon, will set out the policies which will deliver this target in a fair and affordable way, including for his high-peak constituents.
We now go to Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Experts have concluded that to reach net zero by 2050, there should be no new oil and gas fields approved for development and no new coal mines or mine extensions from the end of this year. Does the Minister agree with that assessment by the experts? And if so, does he agree that the Cumbrian coal mine and the Cambo oil field surely cannot go ahead?
No problem. You're welcome.
Well, I thank the honourable lady for that question. And of course, we look very carefully at what the Climate Change Committee has recommended at all times. And clearly we are in the process of meeting last year's recommendations very well as well. I would tell her that the climate checkpoint will, of course, apply to all future licensing rounds. Cambo, of course, is already licensed. Projects that are already licensed are also already accounted for in our projection of emissions from future oil and gas production. So those emissions are already accounted for in our plans.
Sir David Evans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to welcome my right honourable friend to his new position and wish him well. Can I also welcome the government's new target to cut our carbon emissions by 78% by 2035? Does he agree that this ambitious world-leading target puts us on track to raise to get to net zero by 2050 and shows how we are leading the world in building back greener?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. And referring back to the Climate Change Committee Progress Report, I read in it this very interesting comment. I read this at the weekend, Mr. Speaker, while learning into the new brief. They said that the rate of emissions reduction since 2012 is comparable to that needed in the future. That is not a reason for complacency, Mr. Speaker, but I would point out, as my honourable friend has pointed out, that the UK has got an incredibly enviable record in this space. We have grown the economy by 78% since 1990 and reduced our emissions by 44%, showing that the right way forward is to grow our economy while simultaneously reducing emissions.
Household energy bills are set to increase by £400 per year as green costs escalate. Energy-intensive industries are leaving the UK with the loss of thousands of jobs. We're becoming increasingly reliant on hostile and unstable states as we refuse to give licences to exploit our own oil, coal and gas in the United Kingdom. And this week we have found that emergency electricity supplies had to be bought in because the wind didn't blow, all as a result of the policy of aiming for zero CO2 emissions by 2050. Does the Minister not have even the tiniest element of doubt that these policies are economic madness?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, I always enjoy my engagements with him on a number of topics in relation to Northern Ireland, all these kind of issues more broadly. I would just say a few things to him. First of all, in terms of jobs leaving the UK, we are actually overall have got fantastic economic growth at the moment, plus 4.8% in the last quarter. He talked about hostile states, Mr. Speaker. We've done an incredible job at making sure we have diverse sources of supply that do not leave us vulnerable to the actions of hostile states. So actually 48% of our gas is taken from the UK continental shelf. An additional 30% is coming from Norway. Norway, as my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, announced yesterday, is increasing its production, one of our greatest friends. And in terms of renewables, Mr. Speaker, I think the ability to diversify shows the strength of the UK ability to generate energy and electricity that will be both sustainable and diverse.
Andrew Burrison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In addressing the energy trilemma of cost, security and decarbonisation, what account is my right honourable friend taking of the Australia-ASEAN power link, 10,000 megawatts, 4,500 kilometres? And does he feel that there is any read across for what the UK might do to sort out and address the problems he's likely to be facing, if not this winter, then in the very near future?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, you will know that I take a very keen interest in both Australia and ASEAN, having recently come from the Department of International Trade with the new Australia Trade Agreement and our dialogue partner status at ASEAN. It's a very interesting project, the one he refers to. Of course, the UK, we're always looking to make our energy supply more secure, make our sources of energy more diverse. These are the sort of things that we are keeping a very, very close eye on as the potential model for the UK going forward.
Jack Drummond.
Mr. Speaker, if the closure of the GKN plant in Erdington goes ahead, it would be a blow to the automotive industry in transition to an electric future and a betrayal of the British national interest, with 519 workers sacked in an area of high deprivation and production exported to Poland and France. Now, I welcome the statement made by ministers as early as April of this year of a preparedness to contemplate investment in both skills and plant as part of keeping the factory open. As talks reach a critical stage, can I ask the Secretary of State this? Will he confirm that the government stands ready to continue to play an active role in seeking a resolution?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for that, and I recognise his engagement as a constituency member of Parliament. I don't buy into his idea that we are neglecting the national interest. This government and this department have got the national interest very, very much at our core, as you will have heard from my right honourable friend and the rest of the ministerial team going forward. We are engaging with GKN. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has met GKN. We will continue to engage with them at this difficult time.
Davis.
Honourable friend joined me in welcoming the issuance of the UK's first ever sovereign green gilt this morning, which saw a record £90 billion of orders in the first hour. Does he agree that we should now seek to look at getting more corporations to issue corporate green debt? Thank you.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, you raised a very, very good point, and having worked in futures markets before, I think the first sovereign green gilt is a great step forward for this country. I'm sure that HM Treasury will be working very closely with both the markets and advising issuers to make sure that this really important sector grows in the years ahead.
Anna McMorran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Soaring gas prices have plummeted the UK into an energy crisis, with fears for vulnerable households and the wave of energy firms folding. And we've relied far too heavily on gas most recently. It didn't have to be this way. The government could have foreseen it. We see that countries that have prioritised low-carbon energy are far more insulated from shocks like this and protect those vulnerable families as we head to winter, meet climate objectives, which the government we know is failing on. So will the Secretary of State commit to demanding the Chancellor this autumn deliver a budget that can ensure we in the UK deliver an efficient, diverse, secure, green energy sector at speed?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as a former Treasury Minister, I'll have to advise her to wait and see when it comes to the budget. But we have set out very clear actions in relation to the problems in the wholesale gas price outlined by my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, yesterday. Reassuring the public that the consumer always comes first, being absolutely clear that the energy price cap will remain, which protects 15 million households. But her accusation, Mr. Speaker, that we've done nothing for renewables, under this government, actually renewables are up sixfold, and as a share of our energy mix, since the right honourable friend was the Energy Secretary in 2010, have actually quadrupled as a share of our energy generation.
We now go to Jonathan Gillis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend will be aware that ceramics is an energy-intensive industry, and the companies like Churchill, China and Steelite are desperate to find a green solution that will obviously enable to fire the plate that we are lucky enough to dine on here in the House of Commons. So will my honourable friend meet with me and representatives from the ceramics industry to hear how we can help them achieve net zero?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we of course deliver relief schemes to reduce the cumulative impact of some energy and climate change policies on industrial electricity prices for eligible energy-intensive industries in sectors such as steel, chemicals, cement, ceramics, paper and glass. I know the sector well from my previous role at the Department of International Trade. Of course, I would be ready to meet with him, the other brilliant Stoke Conservative MP team and the British Ceramics Confederation.
We now come to SNP spokesperson Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister intend to back the ACOM project as a Track 1 cluster?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we recognise this is a project with good potential, but obviously we need to work through these kind of projects in a proper and methodical way to make sure that all of the questions that you would expect the government to see, to look at, value for money, viability, etc., are properly met.
Stephen.
Mr. Speaker, we cannot understate the importance of the delivery of carbon capture and underground storage on the UK and indeed Scotland's journey to net zero. And the ACON project, let me be clear, should be at the vanguard of that process. Now, I hear the war on words from the Minister, but war on words only goes so far, particularly when we frame them within the record of this government when it comes to sustainable projects in Scotland. Because if we look at the likes of offshore wind, SSEN have produced another report which highlights the fact that Scottish renewables projects continue to pay the highest grid charging, not just in the UK, but the entirety of Europe. What is he going to do as the new Energy Minister to end that renewables robbery?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think he I think his talk of Scotland being shortchanged on renewables is entirely wrong. Scotland actually is a massive part of our renewables offer today and going forward. The second thing I would say to him is that it is a competitive process. Carbon capture, utilisation and storage is a key plank of the Prime Minister's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. So, of course, we look at CCUS and the potential that that offers. But this is a competitive process. It would not be right at this point to pass specific comment on the project.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Northern Lincolnshire and the wider Humber region are playing a major part in reaching zero targets over the next few years. He will have been made aware of a number of projects that the Department have supported. Could he give an assurance that that support will continue? And could I urge him to build into his schedule a visit to the region as quickly as possible?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I am looking forward to building a visit to the Humberside region and the Yorkshire region as quickly as possible. He will know the incredible delivery that has been given to the UK as a whole from Yorkshire, particularly in offshore wind. Of course, the world's largest operational offshore wind farm, Hornsey 1, off the Yorkshire coast, spans 400 square kilometres and generates enough power for 1 million UK homes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister's talked a lot about what's going to happen ahead of COP for net zero. Would you perhaps look back to the scheme last year that was delivered in September, the Green Homes Voucher Grant Scheme, which was set up with from announcement to delivery in 12 weeks and 6 months later was axed, not having delivered the jobs and not having delivered the green home measures? What is his department doing to reflect upon this, and is he thinking about longer term planning benefiting both the industry and our net zero targets?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she will know the course of this through her important work chairing the Public Accounts Committee. She will also know that we are committed to publishing a heat and building strategy in the run-up to COP, and she will just have to wait and see to see what is in that strategy. But it's incredibly important that we take strong action to make sure that our buildings, public and private building stock, remains sustainable for the future and makes its contribution as we move forward to net zero and our chairing of COP in November.
David.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I welcome my right honourable friend and the other new ministers on the BEIS team to their places. And can I perhaps uncharacteristically agree with the honourable member for Aberdeen South and share my backing for the Acorn project, which is in fact in my constituency of Banff-Buchan. But the member opposite and other members of the SNP opposite often like to talk about the Scottish Government's recent commitment to £500 million support for the so-called just transition in the North East. But as far as I can tell, there's no actual plan of action connected with that funding to deliver the energy transition we need. So can my right honourable friend inform the House of what this government actually plans to do to deliver net zero and how much investment has been and will be available through, for example, the North Sea Transition Deal?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he will know of the North Sea Transition Agreement, which we did earlier this year. I share his concern of the Scottish Government's approach to all of these things, and we are watching. It's still very early days, Mr. Speaker, in that coalition, but we are watching very, very carefully. But he will, I'm sure, agree with me that Scotland has benefited enormously from UK government investment in renewables. For example, for the Contract for Difference scheme, 20 of the 58 projects awarded CFDs to date are in Scotland, representing 34% of all CFD projects and 21% of total CFD capacity. He is right. The UK government is delivering for Scotland.
Jeff Smith.
Number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government is carefully considering the Climate Change Committee's progress report and will respond to it in full as part of our forthcoming net zero strategy ahead of COP26. The strategy, which will outline our path to meet net zero by 2050, will contain policies and proposals that will allow the government to respond substantively to the report's recommendations.
Well, it needs it, Mr. Speaker, because the report was pretty damning. The Environmental Audit Committee recently made a number of recommendations to support community energy projects like Greater Manchester Community Renewables in my constituency. So will he emphasise the importance of community energy in that upcoming net zero strategy, as they recommended specifically, and put in place some practical measures to harness the potential of community energy, including support to enable groups to get investment to do energy transition projects?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for that. And yes, of course, we take community renewable initiatives very seriously indeed. And we also take the Environmental Audit Committee very seriously indeed. And I look forward to appearing before my right honourable friend, the member for Ludlow, in due course. But he's wrong that the CCC progress report was damning. It says, for example, the UK has a leading record in reducing its own emissions. The UK has been a strong contributor to international climate finance, and recently John Kerry himself praised the UK approach, who of course is the President's Special Envoy on Climate.
Alan Whitehead, Labour Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I indeed also welcome the Minister to his new post, my opposite number in the department, and I hope he'll last a little longer in the post than his immediate predecessors. The Climate Change Committee's report to Parliament highlights how little progress has been made with the upgrading of insulation in buildings and points out, and I quote, "Insulation rates remain well below the delivery achieved in 2012 before key policies were scrapped." Does the Minister accept that had those insulation policies been pursued, energy customers would have been in a much better position to cope with the energy price rises and the cost of living crisis that we have currently? And does the Minister now take responsibility for the abject failure of the government's home insulation policies? And most importantly, what is he now going to do about it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's a lot in that question that he's managed to pack in. So let me try and answer in three ways. First of all, when it comes to the heating building strategy, he's just going to have to wait until we publish the heat and building strategy. We're doing the right thing. When it comes to energy price rises, we've already pointed out, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State yesterday, at great length, the action that we are taking to protect customers, including vulnerable customers, with the rest of the support that government provides. But when it comes to the Climate Change Committee, Mr. Speaker, we have done very well on achieving, for example, last year's recommendations. Actually, we've achieved in full or in part 40 of the committee's 92 recommendations. Last year, 32 already on their way. We are looking forward to responding as well to this year's.
Philip Holborn.
The Kettering constituency generates enough wind power to power all local homes. But if we're to meet our net zero target by 2050, we need to develop more offshore wind power. Can the Energy Minister confirm that we're on track to increase the capacity of offshore wind from 30 gigawatts to 40 by 2030?
Well, Mr. Speaker, and he is Mr. Kettering, I always call him Mr. Speaker, having been a councillor there a long time and the Member of Parliament representing Kettering so diligently and astutely in this House. He is right. The UK currently has 10 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity. That's around a third of the world's total. We are looking to grow that to 40 gigawatts by the year 2030. A quadrupling, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Successful resolution of supply chain pressures will be a joint effort between stakeholders and government, and will continue to engage with industrial stakeholders and other departments to find practical solutions to these challenges, which are not unique to the UK.
Minister, join me in congratulating companies like Cardinal Maritime and NG Transport in my constituency who keep the country fed, fuelled and supplied. However, they tell me there is a tsunami of HGV drivers reaching retirement. Unite, the union, are saying terms and conditions are not good enough and lengthening the working day will not improve that. NG Transport have offered to resettle 6 Afghanistan families with the requisite skills. Will the Minister not stand in the way in companies trying to innovate to plug the gaps while we tackle these structural problems?
I thank the honourable member for that, and indeed that's exactly why we're engaging with industry, because the solutions will likely come predominantly from industry, and we will continue to work with stakeholders on exactly this to be able to innovate to tackle this incredibly intractable at the moment problem.
Shadow Minister Simon Walpole.
Mr Speaker, for months the government has ignored warnings about supply chain issues from the Food and Drink Federation, UK Hospitality and other businesses. August saw Nando's temporarily close 50 stores, McDonald's ran out of milkshakes, and now the HGV shortage is being compounded by a CO2 crisis that the government should have foreseen. With Iceland warning of food shortages in days, jobs at risk as businesses deal with this utter chaos, looming costs for consumers who are now paying the price. Will the Minister now tell the Chancellor that universal credit must not be cut, and isn't Professor Hazeldine right to say today that with only 2 to 3 days of methane stored rather than months of supply that other countries have, we should have been far better prepared?
Minister.
The Honourable Lady started talking about supply chains and ended up talking about welfare, but let me tackle the supply chains issue, because we're working closely with sector leaders to understand how we can encourage more people to work in these areas. And through our plan for jobs, we're also giving people the skills and qualifications they need to quickly take up roles in key sectors. That's why we're inviting employers from a range of sectors, including farming and hospitality, into local job centres, and as one of the most effective ways to promote vacancies is for employers to come out and market their opportunities directly to our work coaches and job seekers.
Andy Carter.
Number 11, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With your permission, I will answer this question with question 20. My honourable friend asked a very timely question because he may be aware that the United Kingdom recently published a hydrogen strategy outlining the government's comprehensive package for incentivising low-carbon hydrogen and a broader plan to help the wider hydrogen economy develop.
Very much, Mr Speaker. The recent increase in wholesale energy prices strengthens the case for investing in hydrogen in the northwest of England. Can I urge the Minister to come to Warrington and see the businesses that rely on intensive use of energy, and to rapidly progress hydrogen and the HyNet scheme to reduce carbon capture storage in the UK, so that businesses like Novelis, Recycling and Solway Interrocks are able to decarbonise rapidly?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I know he is a doughty champion for not just the North West but also for his constituency of Warrington as well. I'm sure that the Ministerial team and the Secretary of State has said to me that one of us would be happy to visit, and the Secretary of State will be happy to do that. And he's already visited on top of that. As he's aware, many of the decisions around this are currently underway, and so I'm not going to comment on those at this point. But at the end of this, we will have a low-carbon hydrogen economy to be proud of.
Mr Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I welcome my honourable friend to his place. Now, Teesside already produces more than 50% of UK commercially viable hydrogen. What assessment has my honourable friend made of the benefits of the recently signed deal between BP, ADNOC and Masdar for the Tees Valley, and does he support the phenomenal work being done by Ben Houchen locally to revolutionise our green energy sector?
I thank my honourable friend for his question. The benefits will be huge, and this is another example of the fantastic team led by himself supporting Darlington, the Mayor and all of the Conservative Tees Valley team, demonstrating what we can do in an area to level up and improve it for the long term.
We now come to topicals. Clive Betts.
Number 1, Mr Speaker.
So stay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Yesterday, I updated the House on the UK gas market, and as I said in my statement, protecting consumers is our primary focus and is shaping our entire approach to this issue. They must come first. Looking elsewhere, I'd like to welcome the new members of the Bayes ministerial team. We had a great team before the reshuffle, but I'm very pleased to see that we have a good team with us today. Over the summer, my department has been abuzz with activity. We've introduced our innovation strategy, the hydrogen strategy, and outlined the new round for our contracts for different schemes. This is an excellent way to start, Mr Speaker, and I look forward to continue in this vein.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. You're going to miss me out for a minute. I welcome the fact that the Secretary of State launched the government's hydrogen strategy at ITM Power in my constituency. They are, of course, a leading green hydrogen producer. And contrasting with the German strategy, the Germans are totally committed to green hydrogen alone, and of course have put substantially more funding in than we have in the strategy in this country. I say to the Secretary of State, the government has an ambition, an aspiration to replace all fossil fuel boilers in this country by the 2030s. That ambition is important both for reducing carbon emissions but also for the security of our energy supplies. Does the Secretary agree that we can only deliver on that ambition with a much more significant commitment from the government to develop and install green hydrogen boilers across the country?
The honourable gentleman is quite right, and I make no apology for the fact that we have a twin-track approach in the hydrogen strategy. We have endorsed the production of green hydrogen, as he has described that the German government has done, but we've also endorsed the production of blue hydrogen, because in the first instance he will understand that blue hydrogen is much cheaper than green hydrogen, and in order to kickstart a hydrogen economy we need a cheap source of decarbonised hydrogen. And as such, blue hydrogen represents a transition to an economy which can be driven more by green hydrogen. So the twin-track approach we've outlined is certainly the best approach.
Eric Bolling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently held an event for leading Worcestershire businesses on the journey to COP26 and net zero, and I was impressed with their plans for investment. Can the Secretary of State reassure the House that now that 1 in 6 cars in this country purchased are electric, that in rural areas the grid is going to be strengthened to ensure that we can have widespread adoption of this new technology?
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for the question. I know as a former Treasury Minister that she's very, very focused on making this green transition as economically successful as possible. And of course, I and others in the government are very focused on getting a proper EV charge rollout. And I'd be very happy to speak to her to discuss the plans that we've adopted. Thank you.
Shadow Secretary of State Ed Miliband.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, families looking at soaring gas prices will be deeply worried about how they will pay their bills. And one of the reasons that UK households are particularly vulnerable is the government's failure on home insulation. Emissions from buildings are in fact higher today than in 2015. And I'm afraid to say the Secretary of State's record is abysmal. The fiasco of the Green Homes Grant, cuts to spending, a heat and building strategy originally promised for spring 2020, still not published, and no proper plan for retrofit. Will he admit that families this winter will be paying the price of the government's failure on home insulation?
That at all. He will know. I think he got the dates wrong. It was 2021. It was Q1 2021. I was the Energy Minister who said that it would be Q1 2021. So he's wrong. It's still late. I want to publish it as quickly as possible. I can admit that candidly. But he talks about the Green Homes Grant. I'd like to remind him that of the £3 billion that was sequestered ring-fence for the Green Homes Grant, 1.5 billion was dispersed through Salix, which was public buildings. That worked very well. £500 million was dispersed by local authorities, and that was successful. The owner-occupier bit of it was a 6-month programme. It was a short-term fiscal stimulus, which we have closed, and we're going to have a replacement imminently.
Yeah. Complete fiasco, and what did he do? He's actually cut the money that was supposed to be allocated to homeowners. Now, at least 500,000 families, Mr. Speaker, are going to be thrown into fuel poverty by the rise in energy prices. And on top of that, along with national insurance rises, millions of families are facing a £1,000 a year cut in universal credit in just 10 days' time. It is a Tory triple whammy made in Downing Street. Will he stand up for the millions of people deeply worried about their bills and tell the Prime Minister he should cancel the universal credit cut?
So, of course, I've got a sense of déjà vu. We addressed this issue directly yesterday, and I've said, and he knows with his experience in well, I was going to say government, but I mean in opposition, he knows that this issue is a matter for the Chancellor in discussion with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, with regard to universal credit.
Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The space sector presents us with huge opportunities for the future prosperity of this country. Can my right honourable friend therefore tell the House what plans he is developing with regard to the implementation, ownership, governance and funding of key elements of the National Space Strategy?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I first of all pay tribute to my honourable friend who's been a phenomenal champion of the science and technology in space. I'm delighted to say that the government is very shortly to publish our national space strategy, into which we put a huge amount of work. And in addition to the 1.4 billion that we spend on defence space activities in our innovation strategy, we're looking to make sure that we boost the wider science and technology applications of our £16.4 billion space sector.
Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was privileged to meet international rugby legend Doddy Weir before leading a debate on the petition he created on motor neuron disease in support of the targeted £50 million expenditure. Now, I certainly have been convinced by his arguments. We've heard cross-party support here today. Will the Minister now commit to support this spending review bid?
Absolutely. In relation to this question, I pointed out the UKRI spent £15.9 million in the last fiscal year. The UKRI portion of our department spend is being negotiated in the course of the spending review. And absolutely, I'd be very happy to follow the guidance of the Honourable Gentleman and make sure that we properly fund research into motor neuron disease.
McCrawley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Cornish Lithium, and alongside geothermal energy, will play a vital role in levelling up across Cornwall with the economic and job opportunities that it can provide. Therefore, will the Secretary of State or Minister commit to visiting Cornish Lithium and GEL with myself in the near future so that we can show you why this project very much deserves to have continued support from government?
Well, I thank her for that question. I know she's absolutely tireless in promoting Truro and Falmouth. It's a very interesting project. Last year, the new Foreign Secretary, the member for South West Norfolk, made a successful visit to the site. Subject to diary commitments, I or the Secretary of State would be delighted to visit the latest progress, which is supported in part by our Getting Building Fund.
Question number 13, Mr. Speaker. Okay. Mr. Speaker, Stockport has a vibrant high street with excellent retailers and independent businesses. But in recent years, and particularly after the pandemic, many have had to shut up shop, and like lots of other high streets, we've lost beloved names like BHS and Debenhams after they went into administration or moved online. What steps is the Minister therefore taking to ensure that large online retailers don't undercut our high street stores?
I thank the Honourable Gentleman, and he'll know that, that his constituency, his areas, receive £14.5 million in the future High Street Fund money, which will help revitalise, bring local projects to life to revitalise the High Street. But in the meantime, we will work with the sector, work across government to make sure that we get the balance right to having online retail, but also bricks and mortar, which bring community spirit and such social value into areas like his constituency.
Jason McCann.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we've already heard, with gas prices soaring, will the Secretary of State please turbocharge plans for home insulation schemes to not only help bring down household bills, but also to make people's homes greener?
Absolutely right, and I fully recognise, as my honourable friend appreciates, that we've had huge success in decarbonising our power sector, but we need to really accelerate the decarbonisation of our homes and buildings. As I pointed out to the right honourable gentleman, we have had some success in terms of decarbonising public sector buildings, particularly through Salix, but we need to focus now on decarbonising our dwellings and other buildings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister can play accounting games over Cambo oil field, arguing that it was licensed 20 years ago, but essentially its emissions are still going to drive climate change. New research has shown that 60% of existing oil and gas reserves must stay in the ground if we're to stay within 1.5 degrees. And the IEA has said there must be no oil and gas, no new oil and gas development of any kind. So what kind of message does he think it gives out when we've got COP26 in just 6 weeks' time? If this government is going ahead with more oil and gas, what message does that give out when he's trying to have international diplomacy?
She will appreciate that in regard to Cambo specifically, this decision is being scrutinised in the normal regulatory way. What I would say to her, and in terms of her approach, what I did as an energy minister was help negotiate a North Sea transition deal. And that was the key of that was in the word transition. We need to transition our existing oil and gas sector to a decarbonised platform. What she and others like her want to see is a complete eclipse and shutting down of oil and gas with 250,000 jobs vanishing overnight. That would be completely irresponsible to do.
Mr. Speaker, retail accounts for 5% of our economy, but pays 25% of all business rates. Yesterday, the British Retail Consortium published a report showing 83% of retailers feel they may likely to have to close stores should that burden not be reduced. Can my right honourable friend confirm that we remain committed to a fundamental review of business rates and when we might hear more about this?
I thank my honourable friend, and he's a real champion for his area. He talks often about his family business like Strickland and Holt that was established in his area in 1854 and what those kind of places make to the economy. We are indeed expecting the outcome of the fundamental review of business rates to conclude in the autumn. And the businesses have already benefited from 100% of business rates relief until 30th of June 2021 and continue to benefit from 66% business rates relief until 31st of March 2022.
Gareth Thomas.
Mr. Speaker, many people applying for jobs have to jump through a series of stages in the recruitment process before they can find out what the salary would be if they were to be successful. So isn't it time that ministers sat down with job application platforms like LinkedIn and told them to require adverts to advertise a minimum salary level in the actual advert?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that. And we do often speak with the recruitment sector on a number of occasions, and I'll happily sit down with him and discuss this further.
Michael Longe.
Mr. Speaker, the resilience of our energy sector and our journey towards net zero are key matters for this House. So could I ask the Minister what steps is he taking to ensure that nuclear power forms an important part of our future energy mix?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he's right. Nuclear power is a vital part of our future energy mix. We've committed to trying to achieve at least one more gigawatt power plant this Parliament. We have also set out plans for small and advanced nuclear reactors.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. May I be able to press the Secretary of State further on blue hydrogen? Blue hydrogen is based, the source of blue hydrogen is natural gas, a fossil fuel. So how can a government committed to net zero invest in new technologies, invest millions of pounds into new technologies based on fossil fuels? The Minister has said several times it's a transition. Since it's not a net zero technology, a transition to what?
So she will appreciate, and we've spoken about this issue many times in this House, she will appreciate that carbon capture is a key part of our net zero strategy, and I think that's widely accepted, particularly with the Committee on Climate Change. She will also know, with her knowledge of chemistry, that carbon capture works hand in hand with the production of blue hydrogen. And the blue hydrogen is not particularly carbon intensive. And the reason why the countries like Germany haven't pursued a blue hydrogen strategy is because they don't have the physical infrastructure. They don't have the physical infrastructure with regard to the North Sea to do it.
Renewable energy depends on an increase in our grid capacity, so what steps is my right honourable friend taking to do that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there are robust processes in place for bringing forward new grid upgrades to meet demand. Smart EV charging and other smart technologies, of course, reduce the need for new infrastructure, and the recent Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan sets out the actions the government will take in an area that I know my honourable friend takes an ongoing interest in.
Mr. Speaker, UK steel producers face dramatically higher electricity costs than their European competitors. How can the sector attract the investment needed to decarbonise when it faces a £50 million per year barrier to investment?
The ongoing issue of electricity prices, energy prices for the steel industry is something that I've discussed with the sector. That's why one of the first things I did as Secretary of State was resuscitate the Steel Council, and we are coming up with ideas to try and create a sustainable steel sector on a decarbonised basis.
Richard Graham.
I welcome back the Minister to his place in his department re-energised, and as today is Gloucestershire Day, can I ask him to look very closely at the bid made by Gloucestershire to support the development of a vital new technology, nuclear fusion?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Gloucestershire Day, it's a great pleasure to take that question from a friend. The answer is yes.
Jim Shannon, briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The renewables are very important for the United Kingdom across everywhere. One of the problems for the renewables is getting the access to the grid. The energy company, one of the storage company from Northern Ireland, has told me that if that was improved, then the access, storing the energy and access to the grid could happen. Can the Minister tell us what he can do to make that happen? Thank you.
I'd like to hear more from the honourable gentleman about this, and I'm very happy to meet him to talk about it.
Final question, David Davis.
Mr. Speaker, it seems that legislation is the only way that the hundreds of postmasters and postmistresses who have had their lives destroyed by the Horizon scandal will get sufficient compensation in a timely manner. Will the Department look at legislation in order to deliver this?
I thank my honourable friend not only for his question but for meeting last week with the honourable friend from Telford and Tracy Falstead, Janet Skinner and Seema Misra as well. You cannot help but be moved by the harrowing tales that the sub-postmasters tell after 20 years of suffering. And yes, we will look at everything that is required to make sure that we can tackle all sub-postmasters seek quest for justice and compensation.
We now come to the urgent question. I call John Healey to ask his urgent question. Shadow Secretary of State.
To ask the Secretary of State for Defence if he will make a statement on the data breach exposing Arab applicants in Afghanistan.
Mr. Speaker, I understand the strength of feeling on this subject. This question gives me the opportunity to set out where we are with the Afghan relocation assistance policy and yesterday's data breach. I'd like to place on record that I had offered a statement for when we return from conference recesses. The investigation I have ordered will be able to report fully, and I still expect to make those details available. As you know, Mr. Speaker, I've taken the obligation we have to the Afghan personnel who have supported us throughout extremely seriously, and despite this disappointing event, we should also pay tribute to the armed forces for Operation Pitting, and that we managed to evacuate 8,800 people and families eligible under the ARAP scheme since April, in addition to the 1,400 who had already been relocated prior to that date. However, worrying for me over the last few weeks, lapses from the highest standards and management of these people remaining in Afghanistan have been brought to my attention by both honourable members of this House and indeed by others, and it is for that reason that ministers raised concerns both last week and yesterday and sought assurances these problems would be rectified. These assurances were given. However, it was brought to my attention at 2000 hours last night there had been a significant data breach. To say, Mr. Speaker, I was angered by this was an understatement, and I immediately directed an investigation to take place. Initial findings show that an email was sent at 17:44 hours as part of the weekly contact we maintain with ARAP, currently remaining in Afghanistan, and this was copied to all applicants rather than blind copying them. The email was immediately recalled on identification of the breach, and then a subsequent email was sent advising people to delete the email and change their addresses, many of whom have done. So far, one individual has been suspended pending the outcome of the investigation, and processes for data handling and correspondence processing have already been changed. I've directed extensive steps are taken to quantify the potential increased risk to individuals in order to take further steps to protect them. The Information Commissioner has been notified, and we will cooperate fully with any of their own inquiries. I apologise to those Afghans affected by this data breach, and with whom we are now working with them to provide security advice. As I speak, the Minister of the Armed Forces is in the region speaking to neighbouring countries to see what more we can do with both third countries and in-country applicants. It is an unacceptable level of service that has let down the thousands of members of the armed forces and veterans, and on behalf of the Ministry of Defence, I apologise. I offer the reassurances that the scheme will continue to operate and bring people back to the United Kingdom for however many are eligible and however long it takes.
John Healey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for granting this urgent question. There's rightly cross-party concern about this very grave security breach. Names, email addresses, and in some cases photographs of 250 Afghan Arab applicants, all still in Afghanistan, in danger, shared in a mass mailing. This needlessly puts their lives at risk. I welcome the Defence Secretary being here this morning. I welcome his apology, his inquiry, and his commitment to a statement when this House returns after the short recess. But, Mr. Speaker, it's not the apology, but the action which matters most now. These Afghan interpreters worked alongside our British forces, and the government rightly pledged to protect them. Ministers must make good on those promises now. So can the Defence Secretary answer? When will he complete that assessment of the increased risk these individuals now face as a result of the data breach? What action is he taking urgently to evacuate them and their families? And why on earth is the MOD mass emailing people who face life or death situations? I know, Mr. Speaker, from evacuees, Arab evacuees in my own constituency, that have separated family members still in hiding in Afghanistan, that they've had their social media blocked. Is there any evidence of email surveillance or interference from the Taliban? And how will the MOD remain in contact with these people if they follow the advice to change their email addresses? Mr. Speaker, yesterday ministers confirmed that 7,900 applications have been made to the ARAP scheme, with 900 so far approved since the end of August. Have there been any data breaches linked to other ARAP applicants? Mr. Speaker, this finally is the third serious known defence data breach in as many months. Each time the same: public apology, internal inquiry, then silence. No report on the inquiry results, no confirmation of action taken to tighten up the system. The Secretary of State rightly started by paying tribute to all those involved in Operation Pitting. Our forces were totally professional in that extraordinary evacuation from Kabul, but they must be asking now, how can we trust our backup at Modi?
The Right Honourable Member makes some points, some of which I would say are deservedly landed, and I hear to what he says. Look, first of all, yes, we mass email individuals, but we also individually do. This was a weekly catch-up email that was sent to some over 250 to make sure that they were kept in touch, because quite rightly, as many members have pointed out here on a number of occasions, they need to be engaged and know that there is someone out there keeping it going and trying to get them through the country. So it was mass email. It didn't contain their home addresses or anything. The photo profiles he mentioned were ones that were in profiles of the email address as opposed to their names. And indeed, having looked at all the email addresses, a vast majority of the email addresses are not specific names necessarily. They are sort of email addresses rather than particularly. But that doesn't change the fundamental impact that it could have had and still could do. Assessing, I've asked Defence Intelligence to assess the risk to them through all the cases. That will be ongoing, so while I can of course get an update, and I will be happy to share with the Right Honourable Member where we are with those updates on intelligence, and certainly at a Privy Council briefing to both yourself and indeed the Scottish National Party, if they wish to, I can give them a greater briefing on the security situation on the ground in Afghanistan to do that. This group was not the wider cohort that he refers to, the people that have applied since, and Mr. Speaker, to put it in perspective, since ARAP, some 68,000 people have applied for ARAP. That obviously, when it is scrubbed and worked through, reduces significantly, but that is the number of emails that has been sitting in email boxes that has been worked through and is being worked through to try and make sure we find the right people with the right criteria, and then obviously communicate with them. So this was only reference to the numbers of people who had been called forward under op pitting, had been security checked, were ready to go, but never either made it to the Barons Hotel or never made it onto the flight. That number started at 311, as you will remember. Of the 311, there are 260 principals left in Afghanistan. That's 1,232 people, if you include their families. 43 principals, or 163 packs in total in third countries, and 8 to which we have still not been able to establish communications despite numerous times of trying. That is the cohort that this relates to. We will do everything we can. As far as getting those people out of the country, as I said, the Ministry of Armed Forces is now in one of the neighbouring countries and will continue to do so. I've spoken to my defence sections, offered to increase resource, offered to give reassurances to those third countries. We fund in the MOD to fly those people back to the United Kingdom. We have already done so, and I'll be happy to update the House as we go on how many people come out of that country. Some of the other challenges obviously relate to security, and we have to have that balance between bringing people back that turn out eventually sometimes to have the wrong record, and we want to protect the British public from doing that. But fundamentally, that is the cohort of people that these emails relate to.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I welcome this statement today? I hope that the necessary oversight protocols are now in place to make sure this doesn't happen again. The Taliban haven't changed. They seek to exact revenge on anybody that worked for NATO. We must get these interpreters out, or they will be hunted and killed. If the usual methods via the Arab scheme are not available, could I invite the Secretary of State to take advantage of the chaos in the country to find clandestine means of leading these people to safety?
My right honourable friend will know I can't obviously talk about the broader means, but all means will be explored.
Malcolm MacDonald.
Can I thank the Secretary for his apology? I don't doubt the sincerity of it, and I don't doubt for a second the anger he will have felt when he got the news of this unacceptable and quite dangerous leak yesterday. But I do have a few questions to follow on from the Shadow Secretary and the Chair of the Select Committee. Can he confirm if the Taliban has the capability to monitor these people's emails? I don't want to know if they are monitoring them. I suspect he wouldn't tell the House even if he did know, but does it have the capability to do so? How long will the investigation take? Who will carry out the investigation? And the person who's been suspended, are they an employee of his department or the Department for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs? Can he outline in a bit more detail, if he's able, the additional resources that he intends to commit to ensure that people aren't exposed to any more danger than they already are as a result of this? And in terms of using mass email as a communications method, I understand entirely the point he makes, but who signed off on that as an okay way to make that communication? And can I ask him more broadly, because the Shadow Secretary is right that we get these apologies when these breaches happen and then there tends to be silence. So more broadly, what is being done to arrest this worrying trend of data leaks from his department? Is he going to order a more broader investigation? Because I think the House would welcome it.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for his series of questions. First of all, the investigation will be carried out by Admiral Sir Ben Key, the Chief of Joint Operations at BHQ, who also led the planning and evacuation from Kabul. On the data leaks, he is right that these are concerns. The previous leak obviously involved a senior official who deliberately broke the regulations insofar as he took out of the department something, and if the regulations had been followed, that would not have been the case. But I have, however, and I can't say too much, instigated changes to improve information security within the department, and I am happy to brief him on that. The Manual of Protective Security, the modern rules that govern information security are, I believe, fit for purpose. It's really about the training and the following and the adherence of it that it must be improved. And I'm a graduate of something called the Classified Documents Handling course from the early 90s. I think I'm the only SADO who actually knows what type of lock should be on what type of cabinet that links to different types of security classifications. But nevertheless, information security is not something Western governments are good at, which is why our adversaries seem to be. We have to improve it, and we have to stand by it. On the Taliban or any government that obviously controls a country has control of the telephone network. I can't say too much about what they can and cannot do, but suffice to say the method we use to communicate with those people is a way of minimising that risk. One of the reasons we involve emails rather than telephone calls themselves is to try and do that, and I think that is absolutely important. On resource, right from the beginning of this process, way back in August or in July, I was very clear with my senior military commanders and civil servants that they would have whatever resource they needed to do that, to both process emails, to carry people out. For example, it is out of the MOD budget that we will fly these people back from third countries, and it is my view that we should continue to stand by them, including using married quarters, for example, in military establishments to look after those people if they can't get places elsewhere. So there's not been a resource problem. The challenge is whether people have been asking for the resource within the system to do it. The individual concerned was a member of the Ministry of Defence, but I'm very keen that it is not just the poor person who drafts the email that is held to account. It is the chain upwards to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
I'm to the knot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to hear from my right honourable friend on the front bench that Admiral Key has got a knighthood just now, but it hasn't been earned by anyone better for many years. Look, the challenge of this event is not the accident and the mistake that we can see happened, and I think we all sympathise with the Ministry of Defence and indeed with the Secretary of State, that accidents do happen. The challenge is that there are people still there and that the coordination for getting people out is still complicated. Will my right honourable friend commit to working to get a single point of contact for all those in Afghanistan who are seeking to leave? Because the system where some have to apply to the MOD, others to the Foreign Office and others through the Home Office is excessively complicated and is leading to obstacles that I can speak of on at least 4 different occasions of people who are stuck in Lashkar or Kabul or Mazar-e-Sharif and trying to get out but still not getting that smooth transfer that we need.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. He makes a really important point, and I would ask colleagues to have some understanding of this. The MOD, which is of course charged with defending the nation, has in very short order had to turn part of itself into processing visas and doing the job that traditionally we would have done in the Home Office. We have took that on ourselves because of pace, because of the urgency, and in the earlier time because of danger, and our, as I've said, 68,000 emails arrived, many of which are speculative, refugee status, not even in the Foreign Office or status. And so it is a very big enterprise to take on. It's why I was determined to give all that resource. But I would ask colleagues that at the same time we are doing that in an Afghanistan that we have no control over. We are doing that in a dangerous environment for many of them, with a Taliban in some cases clearly actively seeking out people that it wishes to deal with, murder or whatever they are up to. And at the same time we are dealing with an ever-moving situation on the ground, and not everyone who comes out communicates back. When I look at the spread of where people have gone to third countries, we find people in Australia, we find people that got on the next flight, we find people in other parts of Europe, we find people in the United States. The United States brought some people back to Germany who immediately claimed asylum for the United Kingdom. And so what we are finding is people that when we do contact, some are saying, no, thank you very much, I'm quite happy to stay where I am, in sunny California or Australia or somewhere like that, or people who have been here for a very long period of time and haven't engaged. So the next stage, Mr. Speaker, is I'm commissioned today, quite rightly, a full and detailed survey of the people that we have brought back to know even more about them. Obviously, we have data protection issues we have to cross, but I think that's really, really important we get to the bottom of it.
I'm a little bit.
Much, Mr. Speaker. This is another in a long line of serious errors that will cost lives regarding the government's Afghan relocations. Can the Secretary of State please advise how many of these 260 interpreters the government have been unable to make direct contact with since this breach?
Well, of the 260, there were 8 that we have not had comms with since the end of op pitting, and we have continued to try. Obviously, the data breach happened at about 5:30 yesterday afternoon, and we have engaged with as many of them as possible, obviously with the time. I can give the House a rolling update of how many people have responded to that 260 that we've been in touch with. A number of people have already changed their email address. There is a link on the email that allows them to communicate that securely, but I will keep the House updated on exactly the number as we go. I think the other thing about this, Mr. Speaker, is the numbers are changing every day, either because people crop up and say, actually, I'm in London already or in Australia, or because what's happening on the ground, and they make it across the border. Often when they're travelling, they're not in communication.
Johnny Mess.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Between 2001 and 2014, the UK forces employed 2,850 interpreters. From 2014, they were on subcontracts, so we're looking at 300 or 400 more. And the relocation programme up till April this year relocated 440 interpreters. I can account for about 99 interpreters who were rescued during op pitting. So what assessment has the Secretary of State made as to how many interpreters, not families, but interpreters that the MOD has been able to rescue from Afghanistan? It jars slightly with numbers in the low hundreds that he's presenting to the House today.
I'm listening to my honourable friend. Where I take issue with my honourable friend is it's not 99, it's 650 came out through op pitting. We took out an op pitting in principle, so that's not their family. 850 under Cat 1 and 2, 836 under Cat 4 and 50 under other categories, etc., of which 650 were interpreters either through contractors or directly employed or supporting in the contractor role.
Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Secretary of State's anger at hearing the news is not in any way misplaced, and I thank him for coming to the Chamber and making his statement. It seems to me there's a wealth of difference between a mass email and individual one-to-one contact. Can I seek an assurance that every one of these people that we know about is in one-to-one contact, proper contact, either by text or whatever other means, with somebody in the Ministry of Defence or FCO who can mentor them and talk to them and help them face this huge problem?
Well, I can't give them the assurance that they have all replied, but absolutely we have taken a view that they should be case managed on top of the weekly update. To do that, we find it is best through email because of the security issues. I was earlier on pushing for voice, but actually, as I made the point about the Taliban and control the telephone network, you're probably better doing it through another means. So it is important that we do that. He's absolutely right, and only today I pressed about unlimited resource. How many people have you got working on all this? Why haven't you got more? We have in total 50 people on the ARAP scheme dealing with that. One of our biggest challenges for the last 2 weeks was clearing or separating away the 68,000 to focus on the people that are within a criteria that we can then actually really put the resource onto. But his ambition and my ambition is the same. We are there, but it's often in slow time because of the delay in the response to our emails.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Mr. Speaker, internet banking constantly asks customers if they're sure they wish to proceed. Surely it would not be too difficult to have an automated reminder or check if it looks as if an email is going to be sent to multiple recipients, if it's of a sensitive nature. In that connection, I have here a printed list of 70 former long-term employees on British contracts in Afghanistan. I propose to hand this to the excellent new PPSs to the Defence Ministerial team, and when I get informed of a secure address to which I can send them electronically, I will be happy to do so.
The base at PGHQ is open to all manners of communication to these individuals and whichever way we can do best to keep them safe and secure. Can I also welcome my 2 new PPSs to the role? What a day to start, I'm afraid, for you to do that, but I look forward to working with you, and I think the key here is to engage throughout this process with parliamentarians to make sure that I keep you as informed as possible.
Carol Manahan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just following on from the Right Honourable Gentleman's question, pretty much every MP uses a caseworker system, a piece of simple software that costs a few £100 per year, which ensures that mistakes of this nature cannot happen. Is the Secretary of State looking at using similar, and if not, why not?
No, I am looking at that, both in case management, but also, and there should be some case management already being used, but also in the sort of mailing provision. If you do a mass mail, how can you improve that? MailChimp or something, as those type of things.
Jack Leprest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our nation owes a huge debt of gratitude and honour to the people who helped our forces when they were deployed for 20 years in Afghanistan. Can my honourable friend confirm that the offer to relocate and assist them and bring them back, offer them support, is open-ended, and we'll do whatever we can, even if it takes years to do it, to offer that assistance and help to them?
Yes, look, on the ARAP scheme, that's open-ended. That's going to continue. That's an obligation we will stand by. And I suspect the nature of that part of the world, people will come through in drips and drabs, and it may find in 4 or 5 years' time people come across the border. There is also a challenge where we have the principal back in the UK and their families who are not British citizens or holding, let's say, are here in Afghanistan. They are eligible. They will be able to come forward. What we've got to make sure is that they are obviously managed or stewarded forward. I am hopeful that they are at lesser risk than the principal because they are often the women and children, but that doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't have the same urgency and anxiousness actually for their safety.
Jones.
Speaker, firstly, we had secret documents on Afghanistan left at a bus stop in Kent. Now we've had this latest breach of security. I would say Secretary of State has become a little habit forming in his department in terms of leaks of information. Can I ask him directly, does he have confidence in his department's ability to handle this sensitive and secret information? Now, he said he's instigated a review. How can he ensure the lessons learned go all the way through the chain of command to ensure that this doesn't happen again?
I think the best way to do it is by personal supervision of it. I mean, I fundamentally agree with his point that we are in a world with even more data. We have to be even more careful, and our adversaries are even more aggressive at finding it out. Where there was a breach recently, I took action. That individual is no longer in the department, and with this case, this individual is suspended. However, I think he's right. Information security should go to the fingertips of an organisation, from the most junior to the most senior. And I have to say, having been the previous security minister, I've seen some pretty bad examples in the last few years.
Speaker, there is no doubt as to the frustration and the heartache of the Defence Secretary about this situation. My question is, in the correspondence we are having with those still on the ground, recognising that the situation is changing and we are not on the ground, can he reassure us that extraction advice or advice on how to get to borders is being given to those still on the ground who do not have intel themselves and are too scared to move from where they're currently in hiding?
So, in answer to the right honourable gentleman's question about how we communicate one-to-one versus mass, when we do the one-to-one communications, that is the sort of place where we dispense advice depending on their situation and geography.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been contacted about a harrowing case. A man who worked as a UK contractor on a UK project for many years and had a specific directed threat from a senior Taliban official. He fled his home with his family, but when his family returned, his wife returned to the house to collect some belongings a few days ago. The Taliban arrived and she was shot in the head. She died a couple of days later. This man applied twice for the ARAP scheme and still hasn't had a reply. Please, could he obviously make sure that this case is pursued? Could he also make sure that everyone who has applied does get a personal response, and also confirm that contractors on UK projects whose families and who themselves are at mortal danger from the Taliban are eligible for the ARAP scheme?
So, on the criteria of the ARAP scheme, that I will obviously point the right honourable lady to the website, but what I can say generically is that obviously contractors and directly employed, if they come under that umbrella of the ARAP scheme, are eligible, and I would be very happy to look at that case. We assess that despite the huge number of extra applications that have come in since we left, that there is approximately 900 credible further cases of ARAP to bring forward. We are processing them at the moment. That's on top of the 311. We've already brought back 50 from that cohort, and we will continue to bring those people out, or indeed from third countries where we find them. Look, I think the case in point she makes is the most worrying part, which is despite the warm words of the Taliban when they started in their effort to run the country, we have seen significant amounts of that type of incident occurring, which only adds to my sense of sorrow for what happened today.
I commend the Secretary of State for his response to the urgent question, for the action he's taken, and also for all his efforts throughout Operation Pitting. Quite a few numbers have been spread around the chamber during the statement. I think the Secretary of State said there'd been 68,000 email applications to ARAP. I believe the Shadow Secretary of State said there were 7,900 that had been processed and 900 approved. Could we have a definitive list of applications received, those being processed, and those that have been approved?
If my honourable friend accepts that this will be rolling because it's moving, I'll be happy to give him, write to him with the details as of a fixed period of time. Obviously, those vast amounts were a range of people, speculative, potentially refugee status, as well as ARAP, and that's been part of the resource has been literally taking up trying to separate the two into it. But I think the other thing to say, Mr. Speaker, is You know, for me and for the department, we started on the ARAP when I went to see the Home Secretary in September 2020. That's when we realised that the previous scheme wasn't working. It's why we took the steps we needed to, and then it was signed off by the NSC in December 2020. This has been a scheme that in large parts is mature, but the final collapse in Kabul is the one that has clearly put the biggest test on, and that's why we're going to do everything we can for the people left behind.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the 4th data breach this year, and would the Secretary of State agree with me that his department has a systemic problem on data security, and can he say what steps he's going to take to fix these issues and to ensure the safety of the thousands who are still waiting to be evacuated, and what assurances he can give the families in my Liverpool Riverside constituency who are very concerned about the safety of their loved ones still waiting to be evacuated?
Well, the assurance I can give, I'm afraid, is only limited given the fact we are no longer in Afghanistan and indeed the actions of the Taliban, and I think to give you a 100% assurance would be misleading. On data, as I've said earlier to colleagues in this House, members of this House, it isn't good enough. It's not a unique MOD thing, but across the board, information security has to improve. We are investing billions of pounds in improving our systems, our computer systems and our encryption. That is incredibly important to keep one step ahead. A lot of it, unfortunately, I can't talk about in public, but it does take significant commitment and funding, and British know how to do.
Sean Bailey.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his characteristic candour in how he's addressed these issues. The sad fact is, Mr. Speaker, that we're probably going to see another Operation Pitting at some point in our lifetimes. Can my right honourable friend assure me that he will be working across the board, particularly with our allies, to ensure that information security standards are improved and that we can continue to be at the forefront of protecting the most vulnerable in the world?
I think, Mr. Speaker, the lesson learnt from this was an evacuation in the 21st century where emails, WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook was a running commentary, but also we had incidents where serving officers and soldiers in Kabul on the operation were having their inbox filled up with former colleagues emailing them in the hundreds with, can you get X and Y out? It wouldn't have happened in my day because we didn't have that type of network. It is a new phenomena. I met today with the Five Eyes Chief of Defence Staffs, for example, and we discussed the change. That is something we're going to have to take into consideration, how you do many military operations in full glow of social media and indeed with people out there who can communicate but might not be safe. And that's usually we equate being able to communicate with being safe. Now we are in a very different world, and I think that is a lesson for all militaries around the world to learn from.
And this Lawton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. An Afghan family I saw in surgery yesterday told me a relative working with coalition forces had been literally blown to bits by the Taliban in a targeted assassination 2 days before they took Kabul. Other relatives are similarly at risk, but the response I've had from the MOD says they're not eligible for ARAP. We're assembling more evidence in that case, but as I've only had 4 replies from over 100 live cases, I'm not hopeful. And even if they are accepted onto the scheme, what do I tell them to do next?
I understand the Right Honourable Member's desire to case manage his individual cases. But what I would say is we are doing everything we can with the people that are referred to as either via members or directly or through the application process. We are putting all our resource into dealing with them. We will keep colleagues and members up to date as much as possible. But if you want specific advice for each case, can I urge the Honourable Member to make sure that that is delivered by the people that are coordinating it. If it is people that are not eligible and he thinks should be eligible, I'm very happy to look again at their case if he writes to me with those details to make sure we can see what we can do.
Speaker, I can thank the Secretary of State for his statement and his commitment to update the House after the recess. So when he does that in 5 or 6 weeks' time, can he please ensure he gives an accurate assessment of the additional threats and intimidation faced by the Afghan nationals as a result of this data breach? And I say that because
I'm less concerned about the technical nature of the failing, however important that is, and more concerned with the lives of the individuals and their families.
The honourable member puts his question very well, and I will be happy to update the House on the threat situation to both Afghans who work for us, but also overall to us as well in the United Kingdom, of any growth in terrorism threat from that country.
Rachel Bassel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Asking people simply to change their email address seems woefully inadequate in the light that names can be extracted from email addresses. So what additional security advice has he given to interpreters and their families that were on the email list?
Well, as I've said, they will be contacted or have been contacted, and where there is, on a one-to-one basis, through a sort of case management process, we will be able to try and tailor-make advice both in counterintelligence methods, how to protect yourself, and indeed locations of where you should go if we think something is more safe.
Christine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Although the breaches in his department, the Secretary of State outlined what discussions he's having with his counterparts in the Foreign Office and Home Office. Are there any specific measures being taken now to secure the information of all cases processed? And what assessment can he give that the Ministry of Defence can ensure the correct information is going to the correct part of government so that we can help those we have a duty to help?
Mr. Speaker, amongst the 50 personnel working on ARAP scheme in PJHQ, there are a number embedded in other departments whose main job is to liaise everything from Parliament all the way through to the Home Office to the Foreign Office to make sure that information is cross-checked. Some of it is cross-checking because some of the applicants have applied to all schemes, but I do hear what my honourable friend, the Chair of the Foreign Select Committee, said about the demand for a single point of contact, and maybe that might help going forward.
Margaret Ferrier.
Mr. Speaker, I have a constituency case that I've written to the Home Office about. The case relates to an 18-year-old woman who married my British constituent. Her father worked as a translator for a number of allies in Afghanistan, albeit not the UK. The parents and siblings may be evacuated, but she'll be left behind, alone and vulnerable. This data breach is only exacerbating her worry and distress still stuck in Kabul. Can the Secretary of State advise what discussions he has had with colleagues about how these vulnerable citizens will be supported?
The Honourable Lady raises a challenging type of case. She is therefore probably an adult. She is not herself the interpreter. He worked for a third country. What I am happy to do on that case, if she sends me the details, to approach that third country that he worked for to see if we can help assist that case, or get them to assist in that case.
We now come to Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for his dedication to the job in hand and for answering the questions as well. In Northern Ireland, Royal Irish Regiment, PSNI, prison officers and elected representatives know only too well the awful feeling of knowing that your safe haven of your home is endangered. What has been done to help those who responded with personal details to enable them to relocate quickly and safely in the interim period?
Well, I think that the first thing is to obviously establish that contact with as many of them as possible, which is we're doing, and I've offered to update the House on how many we'll have done. I'll see what I can do by the end of today, or certainly by the end of the week, to see. I think that's the first thing, establish either a new contact details, get some assurance about them, but at the same time start the one-to-one, or continue the one-to-one management of their case.
We are now coming to the statement. What I would say is I've done a special agreement with the Home Secretary to extend the length of the statement, because I've been given that advance notice. I believe the opposition has been told as well. That's great. I now come to the Home Secretary on the statement. Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on the announcement today by Counter-Terrorism Policing that the Crown Prosecution Service has authorised charges against a third individual in relation to the 2018 Salisbury attack, an appalling event that shook the entire country and united our allies in condemnation. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the opposition for their courtesy and support in allowing some of the parliamentary time to be used for the statement, and the House will of course understand that this is an ongoing investigation, and so we are limited in terms of what can be said about these three individuals. In March 2018, Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were poisoned with a military-grade nerve agent of a type developed by Russia, commonly known as Novichok. 2 police officers from Wiltshire Police involved in searching the victims' homes were also poisoned with the same agent. In July 2018, a further 2 members of the public were found unwell in Amesbury, both of whom had been exposed to Novichok. And tragically, one of them died, and that was Dawn Sturgis. An inquest into her death is ongoing, and I know that the thoughts of the whole House will be with the loved ones of Dawn today. Mr. Speaker, this House has profound differences with Russia. By annexing Crimea in 2014, igniting the flames of conflict in eastern Ukraine, and threatening Western democracies, including by interfering in their elections, Russia has challenged the fundamental basis of international order. Although attacks like this are uncommon, it is not the first time Russia has committed a brazen attack in the UK. Today, the European Court of Human Rights has ruled that Russia was responsible for the assassination of Alexander Litvinenko, and this supports the findings of the independent Litvinenko inquiry. However, as the then government made clear in 2018, and as I reiterate today, we will not tolerate such malign activity here in the UK. The United Kingdom, under successive governments, has responded with strength and determination. As my right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, then Prime Minister, announced in 2018, 250 detectives were involved in the Salisbury murder investigation, working around the clock to discover who was responsible. On the 5th of September 2018, the Independent Director of Public Prosecutions announced that there was sufficient evidence to bring charges against 2 Russian nationals for conspiracy to murder Sergei Skripal, the attempted murder of Sergei Skripal, Yulia Skripal, and Nick Bailey, causing grievous bodily harm with intent to Yulia Skripal and Nick Bailey, and possession and use of a chemical weapon contrary to the Chemical Weapons Act 1996. The 2 Russian nationals were known as Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Boshevov, but the police believed these to be aliases. The then Prime Minister announced that the government had concluded the 2 men were members of the Russian Military Intelligence Service, the GRU, and that the operation was almost certainly approved outside the GRU at a senior level of Russian state. I want to recognise, Mr. Speaker, the exemplary work of our emergency services, our intelligence agencies, armed forces and law enforcement staff who led the initial response to this despicable attack. I also pay tribute to the ongoing work to bring the perpetrators of this outrageous attack to justice. We will not let this go. As Deputy Assistant Commissioner Dean Hayden has said, this investigation has been extraordinarily complex, and our country is fortunate that so many brave people do such outstanding work to keep us safe. As a result of these efforts, the police can now evidence that Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Boshevov are aliases for Alexander Mishkin and Anatol Chepik, and that both are members of the GRU. The CPS has now authorised charges against a 3rd individual, known as Sergei Feratov, and CT policing investigation identified that Feratov entered the UK on a flight from Moscow to London Heathrow and stayed at a hotel in central London between the 2nd and the 4th of March 2018 before returning to Moscow. While in the UK, he met with Petrov and Boshevov on more than one occasion in central London. The CT policing investigation has identified and established that Feratov is in fact Denis Sergei, and he is also a member of the GRU, and that all 3 individuals previously worked together for the GRU as part of additional operations outside of Russia. All 3 men are now wanted by UK police. Arrest warrants are in place for all 3. The police have applied for an Interpol notice against Feratov. mirroring those already in place against the other two suspects. Russia has repeatedly refused to allow its nationals to stand trial overseas. This was also the case following the murder of Alexander Litvinenko, when a UK extradition request was refused. This has only added to the heartache of those hurt by these attacks, and, Mr. Speaker, inevitably further damaged our relations with Russia. As was made clear in 2018, should any of these individuals ever travel outside Russia, we will work with our international partners and take every possible step to detain them and extradite them to face justice. Mr. Speaker, after the attack in Salisbury, my right honourable friends, the members for Maidenhead and Uxbridge and South Ruislip, put in place the toughest measures the UK has levied against any other state for more than 30 years, comprising of diplomatic, legislative and economic measures. We will continue to take robust steps to counter the threat posed by the Russian state. And in 2018, 23 undeclared Russian intelligence officers were immediately expelled from the UK. In solidarity, 28 other countries and NATO joined us, resulting in the largest collective expulsion ever of over 150 Russian intelligence officers. This fundamentally degraded Russian intelligence capability for years to come. The government will continue to provide the security services and law enforcement agencies with all the additional tools they need to deal with the full range of state threats, which continue to evolve. In direct response to the Salisbury attack, we introduced new powers to enable the police to stop, question, search and detain individuals at the UK border to determine whether they are a spy or otherwise involved in hostile activity. These vital powers are already helping the security services and law enforcement agencies to protect the UK from very real and serious threats posed by states who seek to undermine and destabilise our country. In July 2020, we published a full and comprehensive response to Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee's Russia report. This addressed point by point all the key themes and recommendations raised by the committee. But we are going even further and have committed to introducing new legislation to counter state threats to protect the United Kingdom. Earlier this summer, we held a public consultation on the government's proposals to improve our ability to detect, respond to and prevent state threats, keep our citizens safe and protect sensitive data and intellectual property. Responses to that consultation are currently being considered, and we will return with comprehensive legislation. Another crucial strand of combating this work is combating illicit finance. Squeezing out the dirty money and money launderers out of the UK to secure our global prosperity is our priority. We're at the forefront of the international fight against illicit finance, combating the threat from source to destination. We have introduced a new global human rights sanctions regime and global anti-corruption sanctions regime. And the National Crime Agency continues to lead the UK's effort to bring the full power of law enforcement to bear against serious criminals, corrupt elites and their assets, including through increased checks on private flights, customs and freight travel. In July and September 2020, working in tandem with the EU, we announced sanctions against the Russian intelligence services for cyber attacks against the UK and her allies. We have also taken robust action in response to the poisoning and attempted murder of Alexei Navalny, enforcing asset freezes and travel bans against 13 individuals and a Russian research institute involved in the case. The government will continue to respond extremely robustly to the enduring and significant threat from the Russian state. We continue to make huge strides to counter this threat and to increase our resilience and that of our allies to Russian malign activity. Mr. Speaker, we respect the people of Russia, but we will do whatever it takes, everything it will take to keep our country safe. We will work actively to deter, defend against the full spectrum of threats emanating from Russia until relations with its government improves. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to end by paying tribute to the resilience of the people of Salisbury, who suffered a sickening and despicable act in their community, and to the people of Amesbury, who lost one of their own in the most dreadful of circumstances. Our government will be relentless in our pursuit of justice for the victims of these attacks and continue to do whatever is necessary to keep our people safe. I commend this statement to the House.
I just want to say briefly, the sub judice resolution means that other than when legislating, the House does not discuss issues which are active in the UK courts. However, where in the Chair's opinion cases concerned of issues of national importance and reference may be made, I am prepared to allow such references during the course of this statement. I am waiving. Can I now come to Shadow Home Secretary Nick Thomas?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Home Secretary for her statement and for advance sight of it. And I'm also grateful to the Security Minister for the advance briefing yesterday. The use of a nerve agent, a chemical weapon on British soil, was an outrage, and we unite across the House in condemnation of it. We also unite in our praise to our emergency services for their response, which was nothing short of remarkable. At the time, the then Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, was clear that based on intelligence, this was not a rogue operation, given the GRU's well-established chain of command, and it was almost certainly approved outside the GRU at a senior level of the Russian state. Now let me be direct about this as Shadow Home Secretary, as I was then as Shadow Security Minister, and as my Right Honourable friend, the Member for Holborn and St Pancras, the Leader of the Opposition, was as well. Labour is clear that the Russian state was responsible for this appalling act using a chemical weapon. And today, the ECHR has also confirmed, as the Home Secretary has said, the Russian state's responsibility for the killing of Alexander Litvinenko. Now, I want to thank counter-terror policing for their dedicated work, the wider law enforcement community, our security services, and indeed the Crown Prosecution Service too. And I know the additional information we have today is the result of many hours of careful investigation, identifying a third suspect, the membership of the GRU, and the real identities of these men. I, of course, Mr. Speaker, choose my words very carefully, but I appreciate the barriers that still lie in the way of these people facing justice here in the United Kingdom. I know the Home Secretary has mentioned the arrest warrants and the Interpol notices. Would the Home Secretary also give some more detail on what she said about trying to ensure that everything possible will be done through diplomatic channels with our friends and partners around the world to ensure that if these men ever leave the Russian state, they will be apprehended? The consequence of this appalling act has been deeply profound. We think of Sergei and Yulia Skripal, who spent weeks in hospital in a critical condition. Our thoughts are with the 2 police officers who were poisoned. It's the most sobering of reminders of the unknown dangers our police officers face every time they work a shift. I've met Sergeant Nick Bailey and thanked him and all his colleagues in Wiltshire Police for their service. And I thank him now once again and thank them for their bravery, as I'm sure does the whole House. Today we remember Dawn Sturgis, who died after coming into contact with the Novichok. Think of her family and also the illness it caused to Charlie Rowley. A life lost and lives badly damaged by this terrible act. We also remember the people of Salisbury and indeed Amesbury, who in the face of despair came together. And I also want to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Salisbury, who helped his constituents during this terrible period. And I also say clearly, Mr. Speaker, that this all underlines the continuing importance of the NATO alliance as fundamental for our security in the 21st century. It also underlines the imperative of implementing each and every recommendation in the Intelligence and Security Committee's Russia report It was published in July of last year, and it's a report that must be taken with the utmost seriousness by government. Can the Home Secretary update the House on the progress of implementing its 21 recommendations? And can the Home Secretary further confirm that the forthcoming counter-state threats bill mentioned in the Queen's speech will be putting all those recommendations into law without exception? The report of the Joint Committee on the National Security Strategy, published in recent days, did raise deep concerns about the National Security Council, the cross-government machinery that supports it, and indeed, too, the Prime Minister's level of attendance. Now, the government's response is due by the 19th of November, but in the circumstances, will the Home Secretary today confirm that the response will be speeded up and made urgent? Home Secretary also mentioned the issue of illicit finance. And the government did impose the first Magnitsky sanctions in July of 2020. She mentioned 13 people in her statement who had been made subject to travel bans and asset freezes. But how many in total have now been subjected to the Magnitsky sanctions? And can she also confirm the resources that will be dedicated to ensuring that the cyber threat posed by Russia is most effectively dealt with? Finally, Mr. Speaker, let us unite in condemnation of this vile act committed at the behest of another state on our own British soil, and make clear we will do all we can to ensure that such a thing never happens again.
I'd like to begin by just thanking the Right Honourable Gentleman for his comments and also the very reflective way in which he has responded to today's statement. It is right and correct that the charge and announcement is the result of the tireless work that's been undertaken over the last few years and ongoing work by policing, CT policing, security partners and of course our intelligence agencies. And Mr. Speaker, everyone in the House I think is fully reflective of that, and today's statement and the charges are a sobering reminder of the threats that our country has been exposed to. But I would like to, Mr. Speaker, in response to the Right Honourable Gentleman's questions, like to come back on a number of points. First and foremost, of course, the use of Novichok, the nerve agent, on British soil was an utterly reckless act. And of course, all our thoughts remain with those whose lives have been changed and lives have been lost. But of course, this was not a rogue operation at all. It was a shameless and deliberate attack. It absolutely was, and we all recognise that. And with that, of course, it concentrates the government's efforts, the whole of government's efforts, in response to the Right Honourable Gentleman's questions and remarks, in terms of how our government not just responds, but prepares against such attacks, but also protects our country, our homeland, our domestic homeland, through every single aspect of our national security work, across government departments, the Ministry of Defence, the FCGO, the Home Office, the National Security Apparatus, but also the entire UK intelligence community. And so, Mr. Speaker, I would like to reassure the House and the Right Honourable Gentleman that in terms of resourcing, our resourcing is absolutely always there, along with the whole system approach which effectively governs the entire UK intelligence community. So that covers cyber, it covers hostile state activity, it covers the key component parts, also the diplomatic aspects, the Magnitsky sanctions, the applications of our diplomatic levers internationally, working with our NATO allies and counterparts in the way in which the Honourable Gentleman has touched, and I touched on as well in my statement, when it came to the expulsion of former intelligence officers. None of that changes whatsoever. We continue with absolute resolve and resolute determination to do everything absolutely possible to protect British citizens and our domestic homeland. And naturally, off the back of the announcements today, the further investigations, there'll be more work to do inevitably in terms of law enforcement and working with our allies, and I absolutely would like to assure the House that all that work is underway, as all members, Right Honourable and Honourable members, would expect in this House. The Honourable Gentleman has also touched on forthcoming legislation against hostile activity and also the Intelligence Security Committee report. We will update the House, and I hope the Right Honourable Gentleman will respect the fact that there is cross-government work taking place in terms of the recommendations. We will update the House in due course, and of course future legislation which has already been consulted upon, there is further work taking place. We will of course bring further information forward to the House and of course share with other colleagues, and does this is obviously relating to national security elements with the Right Honourable Member in due course.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House welcomes the fact that the Home Secretary has chosen to come here today and volunteer this statement. It should not come as a surprise to anyone that these links firmly associating these murderous activities with the Russian state have been made clear. Does my right honourable friend recall that a few days after the death of Alexander Litvinenko in November 2006, the BBC published an account of how the upper house of the Russian Parliament, the Federation Council, had adopted a new law only the previous July, which it said, quotes, formally permits the extrajudicial killings abroad of those Moscow accuses of extremism. And as we know, one of the suspected killers later became a Russian member of Parliament. So in the light of this brazenness and this shamelessness, does she agree that we ought to be very careful not only of Russians who come to this country with poison, but Russians who come to this country with funds with which they hope to make investments that would then allow them to get a handhold on our critical national infrastructure, and that we should resist that at all costs?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, and it is a fact, Mr. Speaker, and we know that the Russian state targets its perceived enemies at home and abroad. And we've seen far too much of that, and we will continue always to work closely with relevant agencies, law enforcement, to protect individuals. But he's also right to highlight aspects of critical national infrastructure, but also other vulnerabilities, and that's exactly what our legislation in the future will aim to address.
Now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and let me thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of her statement and for the opportunity to have a briefing from the Security Minister, the member for East Hampshire. Mr. Speaker, I welcome the ongoing investigation into the Salisbury poisonings and the charges of a third suspect. Every avenue and every effort must be made to bring these killers to justice. I also welcome this morning's judgment by the European Court on the murder of Alexander Litvinenko. For those remaining few who apparently still needed convincing, this is firm and final confirmation of Russian state murder on this island. There are no ifs, no buts, and no maybes. Whether it was the Litvinenko murder or the attacks in Salisbury, these were acts of state-sponsored terrorism on the streets of the United Kingdom. We are still uncovering the levels and the depth of Russian interference across liberal democracies, because the Litvinenko murder began a process of lifting the lid on the sheer scale of Russian money laundering, of political interference, and ultimately violence that had either gone unseen or, worse, gone unchallenged. However, the attacks in Salisbury in March 2018 show the lid may have been lifted, but the state-sponsored terrorism still goes on to this very day. Mr. Speaker, let me ask the Home Secretary a number of questions on how we meet all the layers of this Russian threat. Tomorrow, the foreign ministers of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council will meet. What stance and what sanction will the Foreign Secretary take with a Russian counterpart at that meeting in order that these suspects are forced to face justice? Mr Speaker, the Intelligence and Security Committee report on Russian subversion found that successive governments welcomed the oligarchs and their money with open arms, with illegal Russian money and allies of the Kremlin easily laundering what they referred to as Londongrad. So, will this government finally launch a full independent investigation into where this illegal Russian money has gone, including monies that have been funnelled into companies, assets and indeed to political parties? And as part of this, we need to tighten up the legislation around Scottish limited partnerships.
Hear, hear.
And finally, it is self-evident that cooperation with NATO allies is crucial to our defence against the Russian threat. Last week, the Prime Minister assured me that the AUKUS arrangement had the blessing of NATO. Clearly, that wasn't the case. Is the government now willing to open up this agreement and include other NATO allies?
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, first of all, the Right Honourable Gentleman has raised a number of very important points, and I will come on to address some of his questions shortly. But he also touched on, Mr Speaker, the response today from the ruling today, I should say, from the European Court of Human Rights in relation to the ruling on the assassination of Alexander Litvinenko. And of course, he's absolutely correct and right in his comments. He absolutely is. And we've always been clear that the murder of Alexander Litvinenko was a blatant and unacceptable breach of international law and civilized behaviour. And he has also used strong language there. But it also speaks of the robust approach the government now, the government then, successive governments have taken, following even the publication of the Litvinenko inquiry. But I think importantly, Mr Speaker, we, the government, will always pursue every available means in order to bring those responsible to justice, and we will not let go of that at all. And we will deter and continue to deter such reckless and malign actions in the future. Now, the Right Honourable Gentleman has also asked about the fact that the UN General Assembly is meeting this week, and obviously security meetings around P5 partners are also taking place. I can assure the Right Honourable Gentleman in the House that obviously the Foreign Secretary, the FCDO are undertaking a range of diplomatic engagements right now, as everyone would rightly expect, particularly in the UN fora, in relation to this and other associated matters. And on the other associated matters, that also speaks to some of the wider bilateral and diplomatic work and handling around the AUKUS agreement that the Right Honourable Gentleman has mentioned. And if I may, he refers to a very, very serious and important issue, which I touched on as well, Mr Speaker, which is the issue of dirty money, money laundering, and also the roots of the facilitation of Russian money that comes to the United Kingdom. The Right Honourable Gentleman will be absolutely well aware and cited in terms of the government's work around unexplained wealth orders, the work around investigations with law enforcement, but also the work with the economic and financial institutions that takes place in a very, very detailed and strategic way. That work continues, and in fact the Security Minister and I tomorrow will be meeting many of our counterparts within financial institutions to absolutely continue to up the ante, to focus what more can be done in terms of money laundering, but following the money in every single way, and the routes, but also where that money leads to, assets being purchased and investments being made in the United Kingdom, all of which clearly we need to change.
David Davis.
Mr Speaker, can I welcome the Home Secretary's response today? I have to say it contrasts with previous government's response to the Litvinenko murder on Putin's orders, including our own government under David Cameron, which tried to prevent an inquiry and, I'm afraid, subordinated justice to trade interests. They were overruled in 2014 by the High Court, which is how we end up today with the European Court of Human Rights ruling against Putin's Russia in terms of their killings. But after that, of course, the Skripal attempted killing happened. The lesson is very clear. If we don't act firmly, very firmly, they'll do it again. So we should act not just against the GRU officers that the Home Secretary has quite properly highlighted, but against all the manifestations of the Russian mafia state. And I'm afraid that includes some of the oligarchs in London who act as proxies for Putin's Russia, whether they own property or companies or newspapers or football clubs, it doesn't matter. we should act to make sure they don't corrupt our state. Home Secretary is doing the right thing pursuing the perpetrators of this evil crime, but will she talk to other members of the Cabinet to find other ways to punish this evil government that gave these orders? Because if the government doesn't act more firmly now than we did after Litvinenko, this will happen again.
Yeah. Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his remarks, his comments and also his suggestions. And, Mr Speaker, my right honourable friend is, Madam Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely correct in the proposition that he has spoken of. There is much more to do, and that is partly the purpose of my statement today, not just in providing the wider update, and rightly so, but illustrating that we will not tolerate, as a government, when it comes to these types of malign activities, state-sponsored terror that has taken place on the streets of the United Kingdom. And importantly, as a government, we have to do the right thing in protecting our citizens and our domestic homeland. So my right honourable friend is absolutely right, and that work will continue across the whole of government.
Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Home Secretary for this statement and also for the work of all of the police and intelligence and security agencies to have brought us to this point. Clearly, the Salisbury attack was a truly appalling attack on UK soil, with charges now laid against the agents of a foreign state. It should be unthinkable that this could happen, and for it to come at the same time as the European Court confirmation that Russia was behind the murder of Alexander Litvinenko is further disturbing evidence about Russia's willingness to use dangerous weapons in other countries. Can I support the work that the government has been doing on this, but also ask her specifically about the review that was launched 3 years ago into the so-called golden visas, into the Tier 1 visas, for those particularly to look at oligarchs with close links to the Russian state who might be using potentially criminal money and others. We've not heard any update on that review. Could she update the House now on what work is being done?
Well, my right honourable friend, and I thank my right honourable friend for her questions and also for her comments and remarks. She's absolutely right to point to the whole area of the Tier 1 investor visa route, which historically, I think the entire House is very, very well aware, has led to a range of the wider issues that we've just been speaking about. Investments, illicit finance, some of the wider issues of corruption, the lack of transparency. And that was exactly the purpose of the review. Now, I can't provide the full update right now, but what I do want to do is reassure the House and let the House know that the whole of government is acutely aware of how these routes have previously been used, I would even go as far as to say abused, for malign purposes, of entry to the United Kingdom to do us harm and to harm our country. And that is why we never ever rule out, obviously, the changes that we constantly make to our immigration system and also to our visas.
John Howe.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I hope that my right honourable friend will accept my congratulations for her mentioning the ECHR judgment on the murder of Alexander Litvinenko, after which many of us thought that this would never occur again. And I wonder whether she would welcome the calls that I have made this morning as the leader of the UK delegation to the Council of Europe for an urgent debate next week at the full meeting of the Council on this issue, both to gain support for our move against Russia and also to make sure that we can address them face to face to show them down.
Secretary.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend is absolutely correct and right in the case that he is making. There has to be a degree, I think, a fair degree of openness, honesty and transparency in terms of the acts that have taken place. Lives have been lost, and today's ruling is significant. So I think my right honourable friend is absolutely right in the way in which he's been making the case, and I hope that he achieves the outcome that he's seeking.
Kevan Jones.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Home Secretary for her statement today and join with her in thanking the security service and all those involved with it. It sends a clear message that even though these individuals are outside our jurisdiction, we're not going to give up in terms of pursuing them, which I think is a very clear message. In terms of the intelligence behind the latest developments, I wonder whether she could share that with the Intelligence and Security Committee. And in terms of her commitment to implement the recommendations from the Russia report, can I welcome that, particularly the foreign registration of individuals pursuing other states' interests. But can I just say to her this? Those recommendations are important. That there are existing weapons already there in her armoury that need to be used, including against the facilitators, the estate agents, lawyers, accountants, lawyers in London who are facilitating this. If she grasped that, and a new security minister grasped that, I think she could make some great progress and hurt the Russians very hard.
Well, I thank my right friend for his questions and his points that he has made. He's absolutely right in terms of the tools or the levers that exist across government and across law enforcement as well. There are many strong laws in place. And as ever, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is about the application of the law and the levers that could absolutely help to denude capability further. So he's absolutely right in terms of the point that he makes. And with regards to the Intelligence and Security Committee, we will be in touch, obviously, directly with the committee post today's statement, even on the basis of how information and intelligence is shared.
Sir Edward Lee.
The Home Secretary mentions the judgment of the European Court of Human Rights. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, which I'm a member, pathetically has allowed Russia back into the Assembly for one reason only, for money, where these Putin thugs strut around and ignore any motion passed by that Assembly. Russia doesn't care a damn about the Court of Human Rights and will simply ignore it. But this same court is constantly invoked by human rights lawyers when we try and save lives at sea, we're dealing with migrants, or how we run our prisons. This is just a fig leaf for tyranny. Maybe the time has come to replace the Human Rights Act with our own British Rights Act and perhaps get out of this European Court of Human Rights altogether.
I thank my right friend for his comments, and I think today's judgment and ruling from the European Court is an important and significant ruling, in particularly in the context with which we are speaking about. My honourable friend is also right to touch upon some of the other issues that he has mentioned, which obviously link to our work in the Home Office of illegal migration. There's always more that we can do, and we would welcome greater support through some of the courts to help us in how we tackle some of these very challenging issues.
Derek Twigg.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Home Secretary for his statement? We now know that not one, not two, but 3 Russian agents were able to get into this country just by walking into the airport, basically. So can I refer to the statement in the Home Secretary's statement where she talks about the new powers to enable the police to stop and question and search and detain individuals, and also to determine whether they are a spy or otherwise. Whether these new powers are in place, does she believe it would have actually prevented these 3 individuals from getting into this country?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman makes a very, very interesting point and question. And the fact of the matter is that the powers in particular, when the new powers were introduced, and this dates back, those powers were a direct response, obviously, to the Salisbury attack. Those powers are part of the Counter-Terrorism and Border Security Act in 2019 to enable the police to effectively stop, question, search, detain individuals. Those powers came in after the attack. There is no doubt they would have made a difference. No doubt at that particular time. But the fact of the matter is, those powers are being used now. Those powers are being used in the way in which we've spoken about, and I've referenced to in the statement. And on a day-to-day basis, there are people that are being stopped and detained and asked significant questions of. So, as I've said earlier on in my statement, we will look at everything, all measures, in terms of how not only we protect our border, but we stop these type of individuals with malign intent from coming into our country.
Philip Hollowbow.
Can I commend the Home Secretary for her statement and for the action that she and the Crown Prosecution Service have taken? Following on from the previous question, state-sponsored terrorism in the UK cannot happen if state-sponsored terrorists are blocked from entry. And made worse in this case because they were carrying poison. And regardless of any new powers, people travelling on false passports shouldn't be allowed into the country. So is the Home Secretary confident that the requisite changes have been made at the passport entry desk to prevent GRU, used to be known as the KGB agents, from coming into this country when they want, leaving when they want, doing all sorts of things we don't want them to do in the United Kingdom?
My humble friend, he raises a very, very important and serious point, effectively about wider security, how we keep those who should not be coming into our country out of our country. And as I've mentioned, Madam Deputy Speaker, the changes that came through in 2019 speak exactly to that. But also those changes speak to not just the primary control point at the border, but also the level of information that takes place between intelligence agencies and law enforcement, operatives and border force, behind the scenes, way before individuals even come towards our country. And these are very significant changes that have been made over a period of time.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I don't disagree with anything that was in the Home Secretary's statement. I commend every word of it, but I can ask her just to explain something, but perhaps I'm just not understanding. Why is it we were able to identify the two individuals so swiftly after the event, but it's taken 3 years to identify this third individual as far as the Salisbury poisoning is concerned? I know it's a complex investigation, but if she could just outline something that I'm maybe not picking up there. But given we're talking about a breach of the Chemical Weapons Convention, why hasn't she announced a single new sanction or diplomatic response, given we know that the crime actually involved more people than we initially thought who came to this country and left? Why do we not have more expulsions or sanctions? But also, given the range of threats emanating from Russia, whether it's in Ukraine, Salisbury or Syria, doesn't that just underline the need for greater Euro-Atlantic defence and security cooperation, not less?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for his questions and his comments. There are a number of points to make here. First of all, he himself has referred to the fact, and I have too, that this is a complex investigation, and there is a great deal of work that has taken place with security, intelligence agency, and also CT policing. And I'm not in the position to speak of the details here at the dispatch box today. There are a lot of sensitivities, also in terms of how much of that information has come together. And I know he and the entire House will respect that. In terms of the wider threats, it's fair to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, at this dispatch box and across the House and the various committees, the Intelligence and Security Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, Defence Committees, all aspects of national security, we see Russia at the heart of the many threats that some of us see on a near daily basis, but also the type of threats that do not manifest because of the brilliant, brilliant exemplary work that takes place by those who are employed to protect our homeland. But alongside that, of course, he does refer to some of the wider work that could take place. We rule nothing out. We rule nothing out. But at the same time, and I've already referred to, in fact, to the Right Honourable Gentleman, his colleague's statement and questions earlier on, that there are discussions taking place. We have the UN General Assembly taking place. We have the Foreign Secretary at the UN right now. All these discussions with our allies and with many of our bilateral counterparts as well are absolutely in flight. And they are constant discussions that we are having, more so now at this particular pressing time, to look at what other levers we have and what the next step should be.
Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I join the Home Secretary in extending our gratitude to all those who responded to this terrible crime, to all those who are working to keep our country and its citizens safe, and those who are, of course, seeking to bring those responsible to justice. It's clearly essential that we do everything possible to respond to the investigations and to learn from the attack. Can the Home Secretary say a little more about the progress that's been made and outline how many of the recommendations of the Intelligence and Security Committee's Russia report have already been implemented?
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to refer the Honourable Lady to my comments earlier on this, because this work is taking place across government, not just from the Home Office perspective, but FCDO, and much of which is involving our national security apparatus. So in due course, there will be an update in terms of the report and the recommendations, and if I could just ask for the Honourable Lady and all colleagues in the House to persevere with us, and obviously we'll come back in due course on this.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today is a sober reminder of the scale of the security threats we face as a country, and I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. And whilst also reflecting on the terrible events 3 years ago in Salisbury, it's right to remind ourselves of the cyber threats that we face as a country today. Could the Home Secretary say a little bit more about the work that her department are doing to deter the investment countries like Russia are putting into breaking our cyber security?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady, and she's absolutely right to speak, and in fact many other honourable and right honourable members this afternoon have touched on the cyber security threat to our country. And of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, cyber threats manifest themselves in many forms, many guises, right down to attacks on key infrastructure, critical national infrastructure, local governments, financial institutions, retail outlets, etc. There is extensive work that takes place across the entire UK intelligence community. We have the National Cyber and Security Centre, which is led by incredible individuals, actually, who we have the privilege of working with on a daily basis, but across the Cabinet Office as well. So there is extensive work taking place in the cyber space. It's not just Russia, there are other countries as well involved in this cyber threat. But the one message I would just say to all members of the House when it comes to cyber, we all have a responsibility ourselves to ensure that we take all the measures and necessary steps ourselves, our local authorities, organisations we come across on a daily basis as well, to make sure that they're doing everything as well to enhance their own cyber security.
Final question to